And that's when I realised the true potential.
Exactly. It's about pushing those boundaries, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's just one of those things.
I know, so wrong.
I know, but it's still frustrating, isn't it?
What happens when one of Britain's most beloved acting legends sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to be ambushed by a host determined to tear him down on live television? In just 34 seconds of one single comment, Denise Welch destroyed any chance of a civil conversation and triggered one of the most shocking walkouts in daytime TV history. Michael Caine arrived at the Loose Women studio that morning, expecting a pleasant conversation about his incredible career spanning over 6 decades. The legendary actor, known for his roles in classics like The Italian Job, Alfie, and the Dark Knight trilogy, had always been gracious with the press. He was there to discuss his latest project and share some stories from his remarkable life in cinema. What he got instead was an on-air attack that left viewers absolutely stunned. The interview started innocently enough. The panel welcomed Michael with warm applause from the studio audience. He settled into his chair with that familiar, charming smile, ready to chat about his experiences in Hollywood and beyond. But Denise Welch had other plans. From the very first question, there was an edge to her tone that immediately put everyone on alert. "So, Michael," Denise began, leaning forward with a look that seemed more confrontational than curious. "You've had quite the career, haven't you? Made yourself quite wealthy playing these tough guy roles." Michael nodded politely, perhaps not yet sensing the trap being laid. "Well, I've been very fortunate. I've loved every moment of my career, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had." "Grateful," Denise repeated, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite admiration. "That's an interesting word. Tell me, do you think you deserve all that success? I mean, there are so many talented actors who never get their break." The other panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the usual friendly banter that characterized the show. Michael smiled, tightened just slightly, but he remained the gentleman. "I think we all work hard in this industry," he replied carefully. "I've been lucky, yes, but I've also put in the hours. Started from nothing in South London. Worked my way up through repertory theatre. Took every job I could get." Denise wasn't having it. She cut him off before he could continue. "Oh, here we go with the rags to riches story. You know, Michael, some people might say you've had it pretty easy. Good-looking chap, right accent for Hollywood after you changed it. All the right connections." Michael's expression shifted. The warmth that had been there moments ago cooled considerably. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you're getting at." "What I'm getting at," Denise said, her voice rising slightly, "is that perhaps you're not quite the self-made man you claim to be. Perhaps you had advantages that others didn't." One of the other panelists tried to intervene. "Denise, I think what we'd all really love to hear about is Michael's new project." But Denise held up her hand, silencing her colleague without even looking at her. She kept her eyes locked on Michael, who was now sitting very still, his jaw set. No. "I think this is important," Denise continued. "We have a responsibility to ask the hard questions, don't we? Michael, you've played all these working-class heroes, these tough guys from the streets. But isn't that all just an act? Aren't you really just another privileged actor playing dress-up?" The studio had gone quiet. Even the audience seemed to be holding their breath. Michael leaned forward slowly, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable edge. "With respect, Denise, you don't know the first thing about my life. I grew up in poverty. My father was a fish market porter. We lived in a slum that was eventually condemned. I know what real struggle looks like." Denise laughed. Actually laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed through the studio. "Oh, please. Everyone's got a sob story. Michael, the difference is you got out, you made millions, and now you sit there acting like you're still one of the common people." Michael's hands gripped the armrest of his chair. "I've never forgotten where I came from, haven't you?" Denise shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look pretty comfortable in your expensive suit with your expensive lifestyle, telling everyone how hard you had it." "It's a bit rich, don't you think?" Another panelist attempted to steer the conversation. "Michael, why don't you tell us about working with Christopher Nolan on the Batman films? That must have been an amazing experience." But Michael was no longer looking at anyone else. His focus was entirely on Denise now. "Yeah, I think you've got a lot of nerve sitting there, judging me when you know nothing about the choices I've made or the path I've walked." Denise smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thought they were winning. Touched a nerve, have I? You're being incredibly rude, Michael said, his voice still controlled, but clearly strained. I came here as a guest, to have a conversation, not to be interrogated like I've done something wrong. Rude? Denise's eyebrows shot up. I'm being honest. Maybe that's something you're not used to. Maybe you're so used to everyone fawning over you, telling you how wonderful you are, that you can't handle a real conversation. The tension in the studio was unbearable now. Crew members were glancing at each other nervously. The other panelists looked mortified, but Denise seemed energized by the conflict, leaning in even further. Let me ask you something else, Michael. All these years, all these films, how many of them were actually good? How many times have you just taken a paycheck, turned up, said your lines, and collected your money? Because, let's be honest, you've been in some absolute rubbish. Michael's face had gone from warm to cold to something else entirely now. There was a hardness in his eyes that anyone who knew him would recognize as a warning sign. Every actor takes roles for different reasons, he said slowly. Sometimes it's the part. Sometimes it's the director. Sometimes, yes, it's the money. We all have bills to pay. Ah, there it is. Denise pounced. So you admit it. You're just in it for the money. That's not what I said. It's what you meant though, isn't it? All this talk about the craft, about the art of acting, but really, you're just another mercenary taking whatever pays the most. Michael shook his head slowly. You're twisting my words. I'm simply repeating what you said. Maybe you don't like hearing the truth about yourself. One of the panelists tried again. I think we should perhaps move on to a different topic. Denise ignored her completely. Tell me, Michael, when you look back at your career, do you have any regrets? Any roles you wish you hadn't taken? Or is it all just a blur of paychecks and premieres? Of course I have regrets, Michael said. Every artist does, but I'm proud of the body of work I've created over the years. Body of work, Denise repeated mockingly. That's a very grand way of putting it. Most people would just call it a job. It is a job, Michael replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. But it's also a craft that I've dedicated my life to. I've tried to bring truth and authenticity to every role I've played. Denise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Authenticity, right? Like when you played a Cockney in some films and then switched to that posh accent for others. Which one is the real you, Michael? Or are you just whoever you need to be to get the part? The other panelists were now openly uncomfortable. One of them put her hand on Denise's arm, trying to signal her to stop, but Denise shrugged it off. That's how acting works, Michael said, his voice tight. You adapt, you transform, you become different people, or you just fake it until you make it, right? Denise said, I mean, that's essentially what you've done your whole life, isn't it? Pretended to be something you're not. I think you're being deliberately inflammatory, Michael said. And I think you're being deliberately evasive, Denise countered. Every time I ask you a real question, you hide. Behind these rehearsed answers about craft and art. Just once. Can you be honest? I've been nothing but honest. Have you? Because I don't believe that for a second. I think you're so used to performing, to being Michael Caine, the movie star, that you've forgotten how to just be a real person having a real conversation. Michael's hands were gripping the armrest so tightly now that his knuckles were white. You're being extraordinarily disrespectful. Why? Because I'm not treating you like royalty. Because I'm actually challenging you instead of lobbing you softball questions about your glory days. No, because you're being needlessly aggressive and confrontational for no apparent reason. Denise laughed again. That same sharp, unpleasant sound. There's the diva coming out. Can't handle a bit of pressure, can you? This isn't pressure. This is just bad manners, Michael said. Bad manners from me. That's hilarious coming from someone who's made a career out of playing thugs and criminals. Those were roles, characters, fiction. Were they? Or were you just playing yourself? That was it. That was the moment. Michael's face changed completely. The legendary cool that he was famous for maintaining under any circumstances evaporated entirely. What exactly are you implying? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm not implying anything, Denise said with a shrug. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what journalism is? This isn't journalism, Michael said, standing up slowly. This is an ambush. The studio erupted in murmurs. The other panelists started talking at once, trying to calm the situation, but Michael was already reaching for his microphone pack. Michael, please, one of them said. Don't go. But he was already unhooking himself. I came here in good faith to have a pleasant conversation, to talk about my work and my life. What I got instead was someone who seems determined to belittle me and everything I've accomplished." Denise stood up as well, her face flushed with either anger or excitement. It was hard to tell which. "Oh, so now you're running away. Can't take the heat?" "There's a difference between heat and hostility," Michael said, his voice rising for the first time. "You've been rude, dismissive, and insulting from the moment I sat down. I don't have to sit here and take this." "You're a public figure," Denise shot back. "You put yourself out there. You don't get to pick and choose when you're held accountable." "Accountable for what?" Michael demanded. "What crime have I committed?" "Being successful, working hard, entertaining millions of people over the course of my career." "How about being a hypocrite?" Denise said, "going on and on about your humble beginnings while living in luxury, pretending to be a man of the people while you count your millions." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "None. You sit there in your comfortable studio job, judging people you don't know, making assumptions about their lives, their motivations, their character. It's pathetic." The word hung in the air. Pathetic. Denise's face went bright red. "How dare you speak to me like that?" She said, "How dare you speak to me the way you have?" Michael countered, "I'm a guest on the show. I deserve basic courtesy and respect. You've given me neither." "Maybe you don't deserve respect," Denise said, and the studio gasped. "Maybe you're just an overrated actor who got lucky and thinks that entitles him to special treatment." Michael stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but filled with contempt. "You know what the saddest part about this is? I actually used to respect this show. I thought it was a place where interesting conversations happened, but clearly it's just another platform for people like you to tear others down to make yourselves feel important." "Don't you dare turn this around on me," Denise said. "You're the one who can't handle criticism." "Criticism?" Michael's voice rose again. "Is that what you call this? Because I call it a hatchet job. You had your mind made up about me before I even walked in here, didn't you? You were determined to make me look bad no matter what I said." "I was determined to have an honest conversation," Denise insisted. "Something you seem incapable of. There's nothing honest about what you've done here today." Michael said, "This was character assassination, pure and simple, and I won't stand for it." He turned to the other panelists. "To the rest of you, I apologize. I'm sure you didn't sign up for this either, but I will not sit here and be insulted." One of them stood up, reaching out to him. "Michael, please, we can start over. We can talk about something else." But Michael was already walking toward the edge of the set. "No, I'm done. Some things aren't worth it, and this is definitely one of them." Denise called after him. "Oh, that's right. Just walk away." That's what entitled celebrities do, isn't it? When things don't go your way, you just leave. Michael stopped. He turned back slowly, and for a moment it looked like he might say something else. But instead, he just shook his head with a sad smile. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "This isn't about things not going my way. This is about dignity. Something you clearly know nothing about." And with that, he walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Denise's stunned expression, the shocked faces of the other panelists, and the absolute silence from the studio audience. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The weight of what had just happened seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Then Denise tried to recover. "Well," she said, attempting a laugh that came out forced and brittle. "I suppose that's what happens when you ask the tough questions." But her fellow panelists weren't laughing. One of them was shaking her head in clear disapproval. Another was staring at the spot where Michael had been sitting, looking genuinely upset. "Denise," one of them said quietly. "That was too far, too far." Denise's defensive walls were going up. "I was doing my job. I was asking questions that needed to be asked." "You were attacking him," another panelist said. "From the very beginning, there's a difference between challenging someone and being cruel." "I was not being cruel," Denise insisted, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I was being honest." "You were being horrible," the first panelist said flatly. "And you know it." The show cut to a commercial break, but the damage was done. In the space of a few minutes, one of Britain's most beloved actors had been driven from the set of a daytime talk show by a host who seemed more interested in creating drama than having a meaningful conversation. Backstage, Michael was already in his car. He sat in the back seat staring out the window, his face unreadable. His publicist was on the phone, her voice urgent and worried, but Michael wasn't listening. He was thinking about all the interviews he'd done over his long career, all the conversations he'd had with journalists and hosts and reporters. He dealt with difficult questions before. He'd navigated tricky topics, defended his choices, explained his positions. But this had been different. This hadn't been about getting to the truth, or exploring ideas, or even creating interesting television. This had been personal, malicious, mean-spirited. Back in the studio, the show returned from commercial. Denise was trying to act like nothing had happened, but there was a brittleness to her smile, a defensiveness in her posture. The other panelists were noticeably cooler toward her. Their responses short and clipped. "So," Denise said, trying to move on, "our next guest is..." But nobody was listening anymore. The energy in the studio had completely changed. What should have been a highlight of the show, having a legendary actor as a guest, had turned into a disaster, and everyone knew exactly who was responsible. One of the producers was already fielding calls from viewers, many of them furious about how Michael had been treated. Social media was exploding with reactions, almost all of them condemning Denise's behavior and supporting Michael's decision to walk off. The thing about live television is that you can't take it back. Once something has been said, once something has been done, it's out there forever. And what Denise had done to Michael Caine in those few minutes would be remembered long after any of the show's other episodes were forgotten. She had taken one of cinema's true gentlemen, a man known throughout the industry for his professionalism, his kindness, and his grace, and she had pushed him to his breaking point. Not because she had to, not because the story demanded it, but because she could, because she wanted to, because she thought it would make good television. What she failed to understand, what she only realized too late, was that there's a difference between compelling television and cruel television. There's a difference between asking hard questions and launching personal attacks. There's a difference between being a tough interviewer and being a bully. Michael Caine had spent decades building a reputation as one of the finest actors of his generation. He'd worked with the greatest directors, starred in iconic films, and maintained his dignity and professionalism through it all. He'd earned the respect of his peers and the admiration of audiences worldwide. Denise Welch had spent a few minutes tearing him down, or trying to for no reason other than her own ego. She had assumed that she could treat him however she wanted, that he would sit there and take it because that's what guests do on talk shows. They smile, they laugh, they play along. But Michael Caine was not just any guest. He was a man who had started with nothing and built something extraordinary through talent, hard work, and determination. He was someone who had faced real struggles, real hardships, and come through them stronger. He was someone who knew his own worth and wouldn't let anyone diminish it. When he walked off that set, he wasn't running away. He was standing up. He was drawing a line and saying, "This far and no further." He was refusing to participate in his own humiliation. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching of something important. That respect matters, that how we treat people matters. That success doesn't give anyone the right to be cruel, but neither does hosting a television show give anyone the right to be abusive. The interview that was supposed to be a pleasant chat about a legendary career had become something else entirely. It had become a masterclass in dignity, delivered by a man who had finally had enough. It had become a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and cruelty replace genuine curiosity and respect. Denise had wanted to make memorable television. She had succeeded, but not in the way she had hoped. She would be remembered for this interview, certainly, but she would be remembered as the person who was so needlessly cruel to Michael Caine that he walked off her show. She would be remembered as the host who couldn't recognize a legend when he was sitting right in front of her. Michael, on the other hand, would be remembered for maintaining his composure for as long as he did, for trying to engage respectfully even in the face of hostility, and for knowing when enough was enough. He would be remembered for standing up for himself with grace and strength. The contrast between them couldn't have been clearer. On one side, a host drunk on her own power, convinced that attacking a guest made her seem brave and uncompromising. On the other side, a true professional who had spent his entire career treating people with respect and expected the same in return. As Michael's car pulled away from the studio, he felt a strange sense of relief. He'd tried. He'd given the interview a chance. He'd been patient and polite, even when Denise had been anything but. But there comes a point where staying becomes complicity, where sitting there and taking abuse sends the message that such behavior is acceptable. It's not acceptable. It never was. And Michael Caine in his 70-some years of life and his 60-plus years in the entertainment industry knew that better than anyone. Back in the studio, the show limped to its conclusion. The remaining segments felt hollow and awkward. The chemistry between the panelists, usually so warm and easy, was strained and forced. Denise tried to laugh it off, tried to make jokes, tried to pretend everything was fine. But everyone knew it wasn't fine. Everyone knew that something had gone terribly wrong, and everyone knew who was to blame. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, the studio cleared quickly. People who would normally linger and chat hurried away, avoiding eye contact with Denise. The other panelists gathered their things in silence, offering only the briefest of goodbyes before leaving. Denise sat alone at the desk for a moment, surrounded by the debris of her own making. She'd wanted to be the host who asked the tough questions, who didn't let celebrities off easy, who made headlines. She'd gotten her wish. The headlines would come, but they wouldn't say what she wanted them to say. They would talk about her rudeness, her cruelty, her complete lack of professionalism. They would talk about how she had driven away one of the most respected actors in British cinema. They would talk about how she had turned what should have been a delightful interview into an uncomfortable spectacle. And Michael Caine, he would go on being Michael Caine, beloved, respected, admired, a true legend who had nothing to prove to anyone. Least of all a talk show host with an axe to grind. The whole incident lasted less than half an hour from start to finish. But in that time, everything had changed. Reputations had been confirmed and destroyed. Lines had been drawn, and one simple truth had been made absolutely clear. You can be the biggest star in the world, or the most powerful person in the room, but if you don't treat people with basic human decency and respect, none of it matters. Michael Caine understood that. He lived it his entire life. It was in every choice he made, every word he spoke, every role he played. Denise Welch had forgotten it, if she'd ever known it at all. And in 34 seconds, with one comment too many, she learned a lesson that would follow her for the rest of her career. Some people command respect through their titles, their positions, their power. Others earn it through their actions, their character, their integrity. Michael Caine had spent a lifetime earning respect. Denise Welch had spent a few minutes destroying hers. That's what happens when you confuse cruelty with courage. When you mistake attacking someone for asking hard questions. When you forget that the person sitting across from you is a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity. Michael Caine walked off that set with his head held high, his reputation intact, his dignity uncompromised. He'd made his point without raising his voice, without descending to her level, without giving her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. That's the mark of a true professional. That's the mark of someone who knows their worth. That's the mark of a legend. And that's exactly what he